Wow, look at that. We have other two people in a boardroom too. Hey, welcome. Look at this. We've got a bunch of new faces on the call. Good afternoon, folks. Jacob, we let you in and out of the gates, didn't we?
I know. I felt like I'm welcome. I'm being shunned. I'm welcome. I'm being shunned. I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, we couldn't decide.
Yeah, that's okay. You wouldn't be the first. It's okay.
Well, pleased to meet you. I've never met you before, but Alyssa was giving me just a little bit of context, so great to have you here.
Right on. I'm glad to be here.
Hey there, Luke. Luke, do you have torrential rain in Bracebridge right now?
Yeah.
Huntsville?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was wild.
Wow.
Why, are you here?
No, I'm in Owen Sound right now. It's raining hard here too.
Oh, okay. All right. Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, I gotta look. There's two fellows here on a screen in a big boardroom. Can you guys introduce yourselves a quick sec? I've never seen you before. I don't think.
Adrian Bolt from Hanson Automotive.
Okay, awesome. Yes. Pete's right-hand man.
One of them, yeah.
Yes. You're up in the training room up there. Well, welcome, guys. That's awesome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
I hope this will serve you guys well.
Hope so too.
Hey there, Sebastian.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
We're doing good. I was trying to think of how to say that in German.
Wie geht's?
Oh, I will not be able to say that.
No?
I could just say just like hoot or something.
Like a sorry, who?
Good to see you.
See you guys too, thanks.
How's it going, Mark?
Good.
Yeah?
Good.
Yeah. What's going good today so far?
For me, or is that a general question?
Oh, for you. You didn't know I was going to put you on a spot like this.
Just regular business is going good. I had a team meeting today that went well, so I think things are kind of, even though we have some hiccups in supply chains, it looks like we're handling it well. So yeah.
Cool. Nice.
Phone, please say a command.
Line in.
Well, we have a few more of you guys coming in. Some of you are driving, so this will be good. Even more so, we are going to be having a discussion today around a couple cool pieces. And we are not going to be sharing things particularly on the screen. So for those of you who are driving, listening is just fine. So cool. Welcome, Kelly. You might know this fellow beside me. We'll get into that in a minute. And good to have you here too, Brandon and Posts. Here, let's get started here with a couple, just one quick thing. For those of you who are some guests, we do a call every Tuesday with our Christian peer group with a bunch of business folks, leaders, owners on practical topics in business. This is one of them. And they range in different things from operations to finances to sales to even just your own personal leadership. So for those of you who are guests, again, welcome. We're glad to have you join us. And we're going to be here today for somewhat about an hour. Jeff and I were just speaking earlier. I'll introduce him in a minute. But if you guys see high value in this topic, we certainly could extend it a bit longer if you like. And we have part two that could be in the works if you need it later. So we're going to get started on that. Here's one thing. In the past, I would say probably the past 3 to 6 months on this call, you've heard the theme a lot on all the different calls we've done on different topics around this piece about serving others with our leadership and as a Christian business owner. And does anybody, just a quick, I'm just thinking if I could pick on someone. I see Andrew and Heidi coming in and Josh. Does anybody remember this passage that I pretty much bring up every single week from Proverbs 27? Know well what? Hey, Andrew, do you remember that one?
Hi, Jeff. Know well the condition of your flocks.
Yeah, not your locks like your long hair, which Jeff and I don't have, but flocks. Know well the condition of your flocks and pay attention to your herds. And that's the theme of a lot of these calls. Again, just remind is the things we do is about serving others for the benefit and the sustainability of not only our business, but of course our clients, and even maybe wider than that, the community we serve. And today I just wanted to highlight something a little further in that passage. For those of us who sometimes struggle with this concept of, as a Christian business owner, what does it look like for me to make profit? And what is healthy profit? And what is, say, gouging profit? Maybe some of us even struggle with making profit and struggle with the whole concept of directing and creating our pricing. For those of you who do struggle with that a bit, there's no shame in that. I know personally I've struggled with that in my life. If you would like to, just send a personal note to Alyssa on this call, and I'm going to get you some content that I think will perhaps shift your mindset about a kingdom mindset of how we view profit. But for this call today, I'm not going to spend much more time on that, but I would just invite you into that piece if you struggle with a little bit as a Christian leader or owner around profit. But let me share the end of that passage in Proverbs 27. So, like Andrew said, it talks about knowing well the condition of your flocks and pay special attention to your herds, meaning this context could mean your employees, those you serve. But I like the latter half of this, around this thing about profit and what businesses do when they make profit. I'm going to read it from the Message this time, and it says, "Know your sheep by name, carefully attend to your flocks. Don't take them for granted, because possessions don't last forever, you know." So that's alluding to this piece again about sustainability with profit. And then it says, "And then when the crops are in and the harvest is stored in barns, you can knit sweaters from lamb's wool and you can sell your goats for a profit. There'll be plenty of milk and meat to last your family through the winter." If you look up that passage, even in different versions, the gist of it still is about it's okay to make profit because here's how it serves others versus serving self. I just wanted to invite us into that space today as we chat about this whole topic about pricing, how to know if you have healthy pricing in your business and what healthy pricing does for your business. So let me introduce our special guest here today. For about 11 years, I got to work alongside this fella, and he's taught me a lot in business about, particularly about the business side of businesses. We welcome Jeff Scheper. Some of you might even know him, and Jeff's worked for many, many years, pretty much most of his life in the world of contracting, trades.
Okay.
And this, Jeff, I just wanted to, before the call, actually, Jeff was sharing to me what actually got him interested in this whole thing around knowing your numbers, knowing your pricing, how to hit numbers. Jeff, you want to share that with a little story of where did this all start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Yeah, so as Darren was saying, probably about 20 years ago or so, my background is primarily in landscape contracting. And when I was in my early 20s, I started working in project managing, like running the jobs. And one of the things that really frustrated me at that time was we used unit pricing, but there was no idea of how that related to time. So I had no concept of how long the job was supposed to take, for instance. I had no concept of how did I keep score? I had no idea if we were winning or losing because it wasn't tied to a metric of 100 square feet equals 2 man hours or something like that. So that's really where this all started for me, just understanding the numbers and why they are what they are.
Cool. Yeah, so that is an introduction to Jeff. Jeff and I were working on this piece earlier, and in a nutshell, folks, one of the things we just really want to focus on today is help you if you do not know them already. And I think there'll be a few nuggets for those of you maybe who have been down this path a bit already, is help you uncover what are the most critical levers in your business to know when setting your pricing, and then how do you understand those and what do those look like so that you understand the fundamentals of it. And one of them, just right off the top, Jeff, we were chatting earlier about, at the end of the day, planning for profit. So having a budget.
Right.
Could you maybe just share with us, just kicking this piece off, starting with where do you start with that and why?
Right. Well, I mean, it's like anything worthwhile. It starts with a plan, and in this case, the plan is the budget, and really, it's about determining what you're going to do, what revenue target you want to say achieve, and then figure out a plan of how to get there. So, how many people do I need? How many employees? How many trucks? How much overhead am I going to have? And quantifying tangibly on
Mhm.
paper.
Yep.
So that I have something to shoot for. And then at the end, the whole piece about planning for profit needs to be thought of. It's not something that's left over, and I'm hoping that is left over at the end, but that, you know what, I'm planning for this because I need to make it in order to make my business sustainable.
Mhm.
Also understanding that in the contracting world, especially if you're doing fixed price contracts, there's risk involved.
Yeah.
So you need to build in a risk factor there, and part of that is profit as well.
Something I just I forgot to mention to the audience is we have a wide range of different people on this call. Today, we're really talking about a business that's primarily labor driven, meaning a big part of your model is that actually gets the work done is called field hour. So the contracting world is certainly like that for those of you who are in that business, but for others, same thing. What it maybe is a little less prone to is if you own a factory that has robots that produce gadgets, you're not so much a labor-driven business as you are other things. So I just wanted to contextualize this a little bit. I'm thinking though, Rob, for guys like you, as a law firm, you are in that realm too. So Jeff's talking today mainly from a contracting perspective, but for those businesses who are labor-driven, certainly Josh, your business is similar, and for the other contractors on this call. So Jeff, about this piece, you and I were, when you were telling me earlier, this piece around what's an example of how to plan for profit? You were saying building this piece in right away, budgeting already, for instance, owner's earnings in your budget versus thinking about it as a leftover after profits later. What are some, I don't know if you want to expand on that or some other things around this moving around, what are some imperatives in that budget?
Well, what's crucially and critically important in any budget is that everything is accounted for. And one of the challenges I think with a lot of entrepreneurs, I've worked with a few of them, is that they're very, very optimistic. So they don't necessarily budget accurately, or they will inevitably, they're not necessarily highly detail oriented either. And you have to flush it all out, right? So
an example, I think what you were sharing is for a seasonal contractor, I'm thinking for you, Luke, too, is in a business that maybe you have some seasonality, actually accounting for X amount of revenue generating weeks. You just want to expand on that piece too?
right, well, you're getting into the labor plan piece, but more, that's more figuring out what your charge rates and things like that. Okay, so we'll get to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then what about yearly and monthly? What's the big deal with that?
Well, I mean, making a budget yearly first and then breaking it down by month so that you can keep score along the way regularly and frequently. That becomes a lot more important. Well, it's important regardless, but when you're in a seasonal business, it becomes that much more important because you, for instance, you have 8 months to make 12 months of bread, right? So,
Okay. Yeah.
But you have to set a goal in order to be able to track against it to know whether you're winning or losing. And one of my business partners happened to be on this call, so he's heard this before. He's gone now. But
Awesome. And what about if you're a business, so that say you're not a contractor, I'm thinking, let's say you're a law firm, and you have ebbs and flows in your years, like let's say spring is always really busy. Would the same thing as proper allocation per month versus?
right, yeah. So what I've always done with the budgets is make it by the year and then break it down accurately by month. So what do I think revenue is going to be and why, but then also all the expenses, and break it down so that when I get my monthly P&Ls, I'm looking at actuals versus what I budgeted, and I have a good gauge of where I'm at. And I can also adjust on the fly that way, instead of the way it used to be was waiting until the end of the year, and it was usually when the accountant was done with the books in about April of the year following that I found out whether I made or lost, right?
You maybe just, I'm asking you on the fly right now.
You are.
What's an example of adjusting on the fly, say when that month was not the actuals, not like budgeting? What's an example of budgeting? Like, how's that going to help you if you adjust on the fly?
Well, one of the things you could do, for instance, if you're in a seasonal business that runs from, say, April till November, that's the paradigm I come from with landscaping. And by the end of June, you can see you're not tracking in the right way. You could look at, I need to add a man so I can get more billable hours. I need to reduce my overhead so that my profit is still there at the end of the year. Or maybe you need to increase your hourly rate to make sure that you meet your budget. Right?
Okay. That's helpful. Yeah. Which I remember we would do that at times.
We did.
Yeah. Very cool. How about this piece about the difference between what's charged in the balance sheet versus what's reflected in the profit and loss statement?
Mm-hmm.
You just explain, I think we were chatting about the idea of trucks.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've run into too or experienced is that, again, it comes from keeping score and knowing what you're making and what you're spending. And a lot of times what can happen is there's items that will show on your balance sheet. For instance, if you purchase a truck, the payments might show on your balance sheet, but you're not actually seeing it on your profit and loss statement. So your cash flow could be very different than your profit and loss. It's important to have some mechanism to be able to see that quickly without having to do a whole bunch of mental math and look at your scribble notes about, oh yeah, right, I need to remember to add that to that and subtract that, right? So how do you do that?
And maybe just for the sake of some, why is that important? It might seem obvious to you, but I'm just thinking for some of us who.
So that you're getting an accurate reflection of what your cost of doing business actually is, your whole cost of doing business, everything. Another example could be, for instance, some owners will pay themselves dividends, which will show on the balance sheet, not necessarily on the profit and loss. So it's just a matter of having a clear picture there and understanding.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I'm going to ask Jeff a question, and while I do that, I'm going to open up just before we head to the next section, I'm going to ask the audience, for if you have any questions for him. You're tapping into someone who's had boots to the street in various different businesses and has had to learn it the hard way. So I just look at this as a gift to you. Not he would be the first person to say he doesn't know everything, but he certainly has some beautiful expertise that God's given him some cool things that he's learned. So I'd love to invite you guys to ask him some questions just around the first piece about budget. So while you're thinking about that, Jeff, if I were to say to you, if I couldn't do everything this year, or like Rome wasn't built in a day, where would you start? Because you mentioned to me the other day, budget does nothing if you don't have the other things. We were chatting about that.
Mhm.
Is this true? Is this the starting point at the end of the day? I mean, if a person couldn't do it all, is this the most critical starting point?
I would say it is. I mean, and everything flows out of your budget. Because if you don't have a budget, you don't have a goal. You don't have a target. You have nothing to aim for. You have nothing to track against. You have nothing to keep score on. I know it's a huge thing for me because it's a metric where I can have confidence of how the business is doing. Which way are we tracking, right?
Yep. Cool. Nice. Okay. Just want to use a couple minutes here, folks, for you guys to ask a question around preparing a budget. Like Jeff mentioned, it is realistic. It's not what you want. It's actually, or it's not. How did you say that earlier? It's actually realistic versus just what you want.
Yeah.
The piece that actually tracks in, say, as an example, owner, call it dividends, or even however you pay yourself, that's worked into the budget. Questions around, for some of you might not even do a budget. So there's no dumb question here, but do you have a question for us here or for anybody else in the audience just around this piece around budgeting before we go to the next section? Luke?
Yeah, for sure. I was wondering, like, describe to me like a monthly, like, let's say you just finished a month, you know, you have your budget, everything, and you have the accurate numbers. Describe to me a monthly look at your business. What do you do? What are you looking at? What are you tracking? Like, tell me that process.
Well, not knowing exactly what business you're in, but I know the business, primary business that I've been in, which was basically general contracting. It would be a matter of comparing, okay, so let's just use round numbers. I figured I planned for $100,000 revenue. I had 10,000 in wages, 10,000 in subcontractor, whatever, having all that on the budgeted side per month. And then the actuals are entered in against that and I can track against it, right? So I know the one thing for the business that I was in, you know, whether or not I had a subcontractor didn't have a huge impact on my bottom line, being my net profit. Our business was, labor was really what recovered, I'd say 95% of our overhead and all of our profit as well. But just taking a look at it every month and then understanding, okay, am I on track or not? So what becomes important is having good financials to start with, right? And that's a process and a journey in business to get to that point. So if, you know, not everyone has good financial reporting for the past number of years where you can look at historicals and build an accurate budget from. But surely everybody can make a plan. Sure.
Hey, Luke, good question. So Jeff, Luke works in a painting business.
Okay.
Painting, like mostly residential painting. Luke, we're gonna get into on this call then, what are the things that you have to know in order to compare actuals versus budgeted? And what are the hidden things that most of us forget about? We know the basics, but the hidden things. Okay. Anybody else got a question? I don't want to rush this, but Andrew, were you leaning into the screen there? Looked like you were gonna have a question. No? Okay. Oh, Sebastian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. It's more a question about the experience in there, and I would like to know a little bit, how would you factor in uncertainty, fluctuations, some kind, and it is very hard to answer. So we all can make a really tight budget. We can be very negative about the budget. We can be absolutely optimistic, how you already shared it.
Well, one of the things that I've
But
found to be
for keeping score and to say, okay, we are in a good line. Sorry, no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Sebastian, we lost the last part of your question. Can you just repeat that? How about keeping score?
Yeah. So how do you start thinking about where do you keep the score at? So if I'm 15% off, 20% off, 30% off, something like this, how do we make some kind of like certainty in this?
on the budgeting side or on the keeping score side?
On the keeping score side, right? So we could go, let's say if you wanted to make 100,000, you have to some kind of uncertainty, like fluctuations that you need to calculate in.
Right.
But it also could increase your budget that you say I'm have to score quite higher than I actually need to score.
Yeah, well, my tendency, I mean, I'm a pretty conservative person generally, but my tendency would always be to assume the worst on the expense side and also be conservative on the revenue side. And then generally somebody else would look at it and poke holes at it and question it, and we would come to a good balance, because my tendency would be to be a little more pessimistic and a little more cautious, right? Is that what you're driving at?
That's exactly what I'm driving at. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
It's the personal it's a personal experience in it.
Right.
It's not like what business I'm in it or something. It's more the personal experience in there. So,
Mhm.
okay.
The really interesting thing that I've experienced though is that, you know, we've been put a fair bit of effort into this over the years. And what's been really cool is when you make a plan, by nature, you work the plan, and then seeing the numbers come out on the backside and seeing it just fall into place a lot of times was really beautiful. But it was all because it was planned, right?
Yeah.
Not just hoping for the best, but actually planning for it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, Jeff just gave you a little nugget there. You know, when we often say, hey, what's a take home? There's one right there about, I mean, you have to plan for this, right? Planning for profit and planning for all this stuff. So this is my most personal exciting piece here coming up. I just let me just share with the guys. The next piece that Jeff wants to share with you is having a labor plan. Most of us get the concept of having a budget. That's, you might see, almost a basic, but hopefully Jeff shed some light on that. Now, having a labor plan, again, for if you're a business, I'm even thinking of Hansma Automotive, you guys there. Primarily your work is labor in that shop floor all week long, right? Or for Brandon, you and Dave in your contracting business, for other guys. Jeff, do you want to just take us through what is a labor plan, first of all?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you start? And then what does that start to look like?
Yeah, so what I've done for quite a number of years is every year when I'm making company budgets, then I literally make a plan for the labor. So I figure out, all right, so I'm going to have 4 foremen, I'm going to have 4 lead hands, I'm going to have 4 laborers, and I will actually figure out how many hours each one of those people will work in the year. So how many weeks, how many hours a week do they work, and then calculate in holidays, sick days, non-billable time, so downtime or whatever, and actually come up with a number that tells me how many billable hours the company can work in that year. Again, primarily because the business was driven by labor.
Yeah.
That was our constant. That was the thing where we made money. So that was key. You know.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, you gave some examples of even non-billables, right? Holidays, etc. in there. Describe to me this piece around a charge rate now versus that. What you're describing is field labor capacity.
Right.
So what you're describing there, if I'm Luke or if I'm Sebastian, I have X amount of people that can work X amount of years in it, with all things being normal, considering those things that we just, so now how did you determine that charge rate based on that field capacity?
Right. So the way that equation would work out is basically figure out the budget piece and how much revenue do I need to generate in order to cover all the budgeted expenses as well as profit. And then, so I know what that revenue number is. So for argument's sake, let's say it's $1 million. And if I have $1 million I need to achieve in labor revenue, for instance. So that pull out the subcontractor, pull out the materials, what's left there. That's what I need to achieve in labor revenue. And then it's really actually a pretty easy equation of, all right, so I need to make $1 million divided by 10,000 hours of real field capacity. I need to charge $100 an hour. Then the big secret though is that I got to make sure that I actually put in all of those billable hours too. So when making the labor plan, it needs to be realistic, and I need to keep on top of it and make sure that I'm actually executing. If I have 2,000 billable hours a month that I'm planning for, I need to make sure that that's happening, or it's not going to work.
I'm just putting myself in the shoes of someone like Josh and Herman Post, quite a few teams out there working, building barns and structures, even Luke in the painting business, Sebastian, your 4 guys on the shop floor. What happens, Jeff, when, let's say let's just for example, you have 12 guys, never mind 100, like some of these guys have.
Yeah.
And suddenly in a given week, a bunch of people leave or get sick or worse than that, what happens?
Well, I guess it all depends how you built your labor budget. If you built in some of that, the what ifs or what happens, but you need to probably, I know in the situation where I was in, if I figured I was going to have 10 people for the year, I needed to make sure I had somebody else that I could fill that hole with to maintain my labor revenue.
So this is a rhetorical question. I know you know this, but it's for the audience. Now, what if you can't hire in quick order? What's plan B?
Well, plan B could be, so the two other things that you could do would be you need to reduce your overhead somehow, control your costs, and or the other option would be I need to increase my charge rate slightly to be able to make the same profit and recover the costs.
So that going for full circle, the reason why you need to know this monthly, because then you can pivot and adjust.
That's right.
Yeah. Cool. And then you got any other examples of what are billable pieces and non-billable that help, like how to recover that non-billable time? And how did you figure out what non-billable time is?
Well, in the world I lived in, I figured non-billable time was basically if we had company events or statutory holidays, those sorts of things where people were getting paid, but they weren't actually working. But it really depends on, some people would call travel time non-billable time. We never did that. I always charged for the full day. Like if the guy started at 7 and they were done at 5:30, even if they were driving, that was all billable time. Some of you may do that differently. And if you do, then you need to make sure that that is being calculated in the non-billable time to recover it in your hourly rate. So there's different ways to skin the cat, but at the end of the day, you just need to make sure that you're recovering it one way or another.
Okay. I'd love to know, for instance, Dave and Amarongan, if you're charging out Brandon, but from when he leaves the shop or not, or Andrew Mulder, we'll get into that in a sec. Hey, you were telling me earlier now this piece, it's a personal subjective piece, but the difference between the allurement of cheaper labor. The fact that cheaper labor is not always the best. How so and why?
Yeah, that would really depend on possibly what business you're in, but some would argue, well, I need to keep my labor costs down, right? So I need to have more $20 an hour people instead of the $30 an hour people. My strong argument would be that you're going to get, as a rule, if you hire right, you're going to get much more value out of a $30 person because they're going to lead themselves instead of you having to lead them maybe, and they're probably going to be more productive, do better quality work, right? It has to be all part of a plan, but
less non-billable time probably.
Potentially, yeah.
So labor is a key contributor to revenue.
In this world, it is in the contract.
Not necessarily gross margin contribution, but so recovering labor sounds like a well thought out plan, and then pivoting for that. Actually, you could just call it pivoting for profit monthly by looking at your labor terms.
Being able to adjust on the fly.
Yeah.
Or being able to have the confidence that I made a plan and the math works in the plan and I'm working the plan. Therefore, I know that I can sleep at night knowing that, you know, God will always provide, but I have to be a good steward too. And that's
Yeah.
part of being a good steward and having that confidence too.
Like that you shared that. Yeah, cool. We're going to pause right there a sec on building a labor budget. For some of us, well, I wonder if you do that. If you don't have a question, I'd love to hear a key take home. Just want to open up the audience here. And if you have any questions, you could also send it to Alyssa in the chat. So any questions for any of you? Kelly.
Just had to unmute myself here for a second. Jeff, as you're probably well aware, we also have some flat rate pricing for installation of certain components for our service division.
Yeah.
Just want to invite you to maybe speak to that, or do you want me to talk about that
Well, the piece with
as
the
an option for billable hours?
Yeah. So really flat rate pricing is essentially, and I think there was a mechanic somewhere here too you mentioned, but that there's a lot of that in that world too. Essentially what it is it's kind of like a unit price, right? So you're basically saying on average, it takes X amount to do this job. So that would be a factor of how much time is involved multiplied by the charge rate equals the flat rate to do that job, right? So, and then there's many different iterations of that because some people would pay their employees hourly. In that world, some people would pay them piecework, where I'm going to give you $50 to do this job because that's what the book says it takes, right? Is that what you're driving at, Kelly?
Yeah, well, and you know, we've done it, you know, in our business where we've priced flat rate to win, basically, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, for example, you know, when we went through, you know, how to price a job, say a pump install, you know, we count on, the service call charge plus the say half an hour, for example, or 45 minutes. Well, in the flat rate pricing, we ended up, you know, bumping it up a little bit, you know, kind of expanding what the cost is. Say for example, if you do it just based on travel time and time on site, you know, it might be, I'm just pulling a number, $150. Well, round the flat rate up to say, you know, 200 or 250, so that, you know, you can beat the flat rate price every time, right?
Yeah. The other key there, I think too, Kelly, would probably be confidence on your customer's part, knowing what they're going to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having an unknown thing. It's just, you know what, if I'm coming to do that, to replace that pump, it's going to be X dollars, exactly, that's it. Instead of, well, it's going to be about, right?
Yeah. Well, and you get less pushback from customers when you say it's this much to do a job, right? As opposed to, well, he was only there for 10 minutes, right? Like, why are you charging me this much money? Well,
yeah,
you get less of that when it's flat rate.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kelly. That's cool. Thanks for sharing those insights. Anybody else? I do have a question from the chat, but just before I get to that, anybody else questions around building a labor budget? How do any watch outs in that, things that you haven't heard of before, maybe just unsure, or maybe you'd like to have Jeff repeat that you didn't catch it? Thoughts?
I wouldn't mind just adding a comment. Just in the world of budgeting, whether it's the financial budget or whether it's the labor budget, I've been given this phrase, which I found incredibly helpful, precisely and accurate, and that just captures that balance, I think, really well in building budgets of being precise, capturing everything, and yet the reality is it's never going to be exactly as you laid out. So just kind of realizing that balance that you have to keep. Don't kill yourself when your budget doesn't look exactly, or your reality doesn't look exactly like your budget, because that's going to be the reality every time you go about your work.
Thanks for that, Dan. Hopefully most of us caught that. It was a little muffled, but what I heard there is just that whole tension between what you're budgeting and what reality is, and being realistic about that, and the importance therefore, I think what Dan was saying is the importance therefore of measuring it, because there's often a gap between reality and budgeted, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. Hey, I'm gonna just ask, well, Luke, just a question. I know this is something you're growing in and currently working on, I think even with Matt Eckerd, but labor budget, is that something you've ever done before, been involved with, and seen another business doing that?
Yeah, for sure. I was just texting Matt actually, teaching him a few things. Yeah, definitely. But the text I sent Matt was like, yeah, I've done this before, but I do it, and then the world, like the whirlwind takes place. You know, I'm like happy to have people. Like this week alone, like I hired 3 new people last week, and 1 quit this morning, and so it's just like all over the place. But I think I need to, you know, not be like distracted by the ebbs and flow of people coming and going, and look monthly. That's why I asked about the monthly meeting, to have this monthly going, okay, where are we at? What went on? Because I get excited about implementing things, and then this happens, and then I don't look back on it and stay consistent. So yeah, I'm getting some of the knowledge, but I need to like have the implementation take place. So
yeah,
that's the biggest thing that I think I need.
The really cool thing too, Luke, is that, I mean, if you have a budget, you can track your profit and loss, actual versus what you budgeted. But if you make a labor budget, you can also track your actual hours versus your quoted hours. And you can start to understand the relationship between why is your bottom, why are you losing money? Well, when you look at your labor budget, if your hourly rate is right, now you can say, oh, well, I'm short 200 man hours, no wonder. So you know, it puts you in the driver's seat of your business.
Cool. Thanks for that, Luke. Jeff, I was just thinking, we have 2 guys on the call. They've never been on this call before. They run an automotive repair shop from one of our clients, and I was just thinking, talk about a world of, I'm assuming that's generally probably a fixed rate business. Adrian, you can share if you'd like, but what's something that comes to your mind if you think about a business like that? What would be important from a labor budget for them?
Well, it would be no different really than being in the contracting business, where you just need to know how many people am I going to have on the floor, and how many hours are they actually going to generate revenue during the day. And I don't know what it's like in that world. Maybe they're working, maybe they're being paid for 9 hours, but they're actually only billing 7. I'm not sure. I think I've seen it where people have a miss, and they say, well, I'm charging $100 an hour, so therefore I'm going to meet my budget. But they're charging the $100 an hour based on the 7 hours and not on the 9 hours that they have to pay for. Right. Yeah. So just making sure that that piece doesn't get missed, and that's fully understood too.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, we got a question from the audience in the post. Speaking of posts, just before I get to that, Herman was affirming that they focus on available field labor too, available man on the ground. So that's a critical key change. I know Josh and Herman made that shift some years ago, and it was a game changer for them. So just to affirm that this man over here is not nuts. Hey,
well, I am.
Another question is from the audience was, someone's like, hey, I'm a residential contractor. We've never done a budget in 40 years doing this business. Maybe I'm assuming, well, first of all, I shouldn't assume, but he's still in business, so something he's not under yet. But why should I start? I mean, we did touch on that a little bit, but just, is there any summarizing statements you wanted to say there?
I think I would just ask some questions, actually. And probably the biggest question I would ask is, you haven't done a budget, okay, and it works for you, but are your results predictable? Are they what you expect them to be, or are they something, are you making way more than you expect, way less than you expect? Because that would probably be a pretty good indicator to that question.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I always appreciated when we actually started really getting serious about understanding the numbers, is that it was predictable.
Yeah.
Right. I'm planning for 100,000 on the bottom line, and at the end of the year, I'm at 102, or I'm at 96, or whatever. Or maybe I was a lot less or a lot more, but I knew why, because I could tie it to the labor hours.
Yeah.
Right.
My other question might be is, and we see this with a lot of small business owners, is do I actually even know my numbers? Or is it like hope and pray by the end of the year there's some profit left over, A, to even pay myself, never mind, build the business, invest in employees, equipment, et cetera. So my one question to that too, if I've never done a budget is, okay, and so no condemnation, but could it be better so that, to your point, is predictability equals sustainability, right? So that I have a more sustainable business to tend to my herds and care for my flocks, right? So just going back on that piece. Anybody else question on a labor budget before we just get to the next section of knowing your costs? Andrew Mulder, I just want to ask you a question, if it's okay. Do you guys build a labor budget, or how do you do that? You might do it in a different way as a landscape contractor.
Yeah, so I love all the stuff that Jeff is talking about, and we do exactly that. The labor budget is actually part of our overall budget, so we know exactly who we're hiring, how much we're paying them, and it's all built into our overall budget. And but having a budget, for anyone who doesn't have one, having one is just amazing. So I would agree with all that you're saying, Jeff. Thumbs up.
So I got a question for you based on, thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
He's saying he built his labor budget into his overall budget.
Right.
I'm hearing from you though, is that this is a separate thing.
No,
No?
you're talking, no. So we absolutely build all the cost of the labor would be in the overall company budget by year and by month. But then there's two parts to it. What do those employees cost? And remembering all the costs and capturing all that. But then also, then the other piece is, how many hours are they going to be able to work in that week, that month, that year? And how does that tie to billable hours and tie to the bottom line instead of my expenses?
Yeah, cool. Almost like a module inside, because that's a piece you can I remember when working together, you'd be tracking just labor constantly. And you might track the overall actuals versus budgeted, say, monthly or quarterly.
Say that again, sorry?
Well, you would track labor as just a separate, if it was a dashboard, you'd be just tracking labor almost to the day.
Yep. Well, literally to the day sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, very cool. Hey, welcome, Herman. Anybody else question on this piece just around labor budgets and understanding call it human hours out in the field? Cool. Well, moving on then, the next piece is charge rates. So the goal is to recover my charge out rates and have profit on top, just to be clear. But now how do I actually calculate that?
Right. So that starts with your main company budget, which is all your expenses plus profit, plus owner's salary and a reasonable salary, which is something especially new business owners are prone to not pay themselves properly. They kind of think that they get paid out of what's left over, but you need to pay yourself regularly. I don't know what everybody's role here is, but basically revenue. So in the contracting world, it would be revenue less subcontractor costs, less material costs. That leaves me with what I need to charge.
And subs.
It said subs too?
Okay,
I think so, yeah. But basically that tells me what revenue I need to generate with field labor hours, right? So I might say $3 million less 500,000 for subcontractor, less 500,000 for materials. That leaves me with $2 million that I need to make on labor. So if I have 20,000 hours, again, it's simple math, 2 million divided by 20,000, I need to bill 100.
So folks, just around pricing, something that Jeff and I chose to not get into today, but it's almost a separate call in itself. It's so Jeff's giving you the straight nuts and bolts of how to create that pricing. Then there's the other pieces like what will the market bear? Where are we at competitively? Do you know what I mean by what will the market bear? So yeah, I see some nods. So, and that isn't necessarily just pillaging, right? That there's a different mindset to that, but that's another topic in itself. As an example, we had that when we chatted earlier about when, depending on where you're at a month or a quarter, sometimes we did adjust the price here as we go along to recoup.
Yeah.
And then there's other times where, not gouging, but the market would bear something so that we could invest in the future or build something else, or that is another topic in itself that I would like to leave for a separate day. And then the second piece to that is how to sell that. So how do I communicate that? For instance, how do I sell a Porsche versus a Lexus, right? Or a Toyota versus a Kia? That's a whole nother topic. And if my pricing is higher than my competitor, how do I do that confidently, that I'm not doing that in a way that lacks integrity, but I'm truly honoring and serving them in a very clear way? For most of you, you are in the business of not bottom line Me Too pricing and competing with the Walmarts of the world in your context. But I know many of you have already shared, I struggle with having to sell a higher price, etc. So that's a whole separate thing. I would suggest if that is of value to you, to discuss that piece of how do I sell something that's more expensive, let's say it's 30% more than my competitor, put me a text or in the chat. I just want to gauge to see if that is important to you, and we're going to set up a separate call for that, because that is a pretty big deal. Okay, so we had some questions there around just the labor budget. Why don't we go into the last piece here, knowing your costs. This is the piece that you love. You love all the little hidden ones that people aren't expecting. But you said earlier is when you started this whole thing back in the day as a young guy, and you had unit pricing, and you couldn't know the score, you couldn't measure, and you didn't know what the metrics were to even measure.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this whole piece of constantly measuring, constantly monitoring. Can you just expand this whole piece of now? What does that look like to know your costs?
So are you talking about on the budget, or are you talking about on labor?
Well, we're going to both, but I'm assuming we'll start with labor.
Right. Well, with the labor side, it's it's being able to help the guys in the field understand whether they're meeting their targets. I mean, if I price a component of a job and I say it's 200, I allow 200 man hours and they do it in 180, well, I know where we're tracking. Or I can keep track and I can course correct, because I can say, guys, this is taking too long. As the estimator, I might need to take a look. I first need to take a look and make sure I priced it right. But you can course correct along the way frequently and regularly, and keep things on track.
So working as many billable hours as you actually planned or budgeted for. I'm assuming that data is coming primarily from some type of timesheet.
Right. So the way I've always done it is you might have a job with its own landscaping job, a medium-sized landscaping job. There might be 20 different line items in that job, and there would be labor associated with each item. And then I would track the hours against each item and use computer software for that. There's many different ways to do that.
Yeah.
Cool. And as the guys are entering their timesheets, daily or whatever, then I can keep score. And I can also keep score then as the job is going along the way. When one piece of the job is done, you can break the job down into a whole bunch of little pieces and start to get a sense of, am I winning or losing? What do I need to change?
Okay. Yeah. So keeping track on the fly, in a nutshell, sounds like I'll just ask you, what's the biggest impact of keeping track of that almost in real time?
Well,
in some ways it's something you said already. Re-emphasizing it for the audience.
It's just confidence and being able, first of all, being, in my opinion, being a good steward of what I've been given to take care of and to do my job well, but also to be able to sleep at night knowing that I'm doing the best I can to do this well. The math says it's working, so great, I can sleep.
Yeah.
Right. I have to trust, but I also have to be a good steward.
Yeah, cool. A little bit of a different question. We talked a lot about tracking labor. What do you do in the world of time and materials now? Does that look differently? How do you capture that properly?
Well, that piece comes from knowing why you're charging, so what your charge rate is and why it needs to be that, and then making sure that you're not giving all those things away for free, making sure they're getting billed out, right?
Okay.
So I know a lot of our jobs would be 90% fixed quote and then 10% time and material. So it's just a matter of capturing that daily. And that's one thing I can't emphasize enough, the importance of making sure that the employees are filling out their time cards and their time sheets regularly, not on Monday morning, scratching their head, what did I do last week? Like I know there's a few people on this call who know me, one really intimately. I'm known to be pretty adamant about certain things, but one of the things was that the guys were not allowed to go home until their time card was done. It absolutely had to be done at the end of the business day, because by the next morning, something important would be forgotten. Usually something time and material that now we weren't billing for.
Yep.
So.
Hey, just a question, Herman and Josh, in your business, it's much along the lines of what Jeff's talking about, maybe even to a bigger scale. How do you guys track time? How do you do timesheets? It's all digital on smartphones via some kind of CRM. Want to just share that a minute? Probably your baby, Josh, or
It's his baby.
hey,
It's Herman's baby. Yeah, we actually just shifted to a time card system on it's actually through QuickBooks actually bought it. So
okay.
I think what it's called now. It's got a new name. But
And are you doing that daily? The team
QuickBooks time.
QuickBooks time. Okay.
yeah, so
But
I
do you
can
break
log
your jobs down? Sorry. Do you break your jobs down by different components then, so that you can track different components of the job as you go, or is it one big amount?
yeah, in that system it's just one big amount. Yeah.
Right.
So I can break that down, but that's a different beast.
Yeah, yeah.
So
The challenge would be getting the guys to actually fill that out for you.
yeah, the time material relies on logs, right? So then yes, that's amen to that. That's such a
Just don't make it optional, Herman.
What's that?
It's not optional. They just have to. It's part of their job. They have to do it.
Yeah, no, so that's for sure. Like they log in their time every day and it's instantaneous, right? When they log in by 8 o'clock in the morning, we can tell who's on site or who's not on site.
Right. Yeah.
So that way is no problem, but trying to get them to break it down between framing, interior cladding, exterior cladding, concrete work, like that kind of stuff. We just rely on the foreman to fill out a log every day, and they'll give a breakdown in that, but we don't get the guys to try to clock in properly, because through a day they might be on a couple different jobs and then the data gets messed up and gets too complicated.
Yeah, well, I do know that there are other pieces of software out there that you could look at that would help you with that, if that's ever something you wanted to get into.
Yeah.
Where it's actually quite easy. You got to set it up and then it just takes care of itself, basically.
Yeah, our challenge is not really the software side of it as it is opposed about getting. The problem is we have a couple of supervisors that have been a long time with us and are really good at running a site, but very poor on paperwork. So, you know, getting time in is good, and getting logs in is a work in progress always.
Yeah.
But to get the breakdown beyond that from everybody on the clock system would be difficult for us to enforce. So this time we've just chosen not to, just because to force that data and then try to use that data would be just a bigger mountain than we want to climb at the moment. So
well, you have to pick your battles at the right time, right?
that's right.
Thanks, guys. QuickBooks time is, I think, what Post said they're doing. Andrew, you're in Earthscape. I just want to ask you a question, particularly in the world of maintenance. I mean, talk about stuff to the minute. How do you guys track time?
We're using LMN.
Yeah.
So that's it's non-negotiable for the foreman. They have to be, and we're clocking time between jobs too. So they are constantly on the software. It's basically part of their job description. You have to know how to do it, and you have to do it. And we review it at the end of the day.
Okay. Yeah. Is that part of your role?
Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. Hey, Jeff. Just before, anybody else have a question here, just around tracking time? Maybe even some challenges you have in your staff? No. Okay. Cool. So going back to knowing your costs. So now let's say, so that's from a tracking labor, right? Now, what about just the reporting side of it? And we were chatting about actuals versus when you have a month that have lots of deposits in it. Do you just want to give them the big picture of the watchouts in there?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is all like Darren, when he introduced me, I've learned everything the hard way. Again, in a seasonal business, and one of the things that we've always done, and I know there's a few other landscapers here, I'm guessing you do it too, but take a deposit on the job. And in the early days, for instance, it would be called revenue in April, and there'd be a whole bunch of deposits that came in that just went through revenue, and it looks like things are going really well, right? So keeping that separately on the balance sheet as a deposit on account for the customers, and then pulling it into revenue when it actually is revenue, when the work is actually executed on site, as an example.
Yeah, yeah. And then what are the most critical, you outlined to me some critical, what are the key reporting pieces you need to be monitoring monthly, say?
Well, in the contracting world, I mean, it would certainly be your profit and loss, right? How much revenue did I generate? One of the things actually that I would say is critically important is that the expenses are occurring in the month where the revenue happens. So if you get for instance, if you're trying to close out the month of June and a bill comes in on July the 5th for work that was done in June, make sure that that expense gets tagged to June and not into July. That can be a really challenging piece, especially with a bookkeeper, for instance, just making sure that that happens. But otherwise, your financial statements can get really skewed. Or if you bill on July the 5th for work you did in June, it's converse, right? Then all of a sudden your revenue is way down. So just doing everything that you can to get an accurate snapshot of each individual period of time.
So I know this is obvious to you, but why is that so critical? Because in the big picture of a year, I won't mention names, but I'll just put myself in the shoes of a few of these guys. I'm like, what's the big deal? It's all gonna level out.
I guess for me, we're all wired differently. But for me, one of the ways that I'm wired is that I need to know where the goalposts are. And I want to know, am I winning? Am I winning or am I losing? Or am I right on track? Like what's happening? And if that was it was transformative for me actually in work and in business, knowing that that we were meeting our targets was a huge piece. Living in just being confident.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. So that's P&L. Then what about year to date?
Yeah, well, that's on your profit and loss as well, right? I mean, so you're tracking by the month, but then you're also, so if it's the end of June, I can see the first 6 months of the year, but I see that month as a separate entity, as a silo, but then I also see my year to date from January to June, what's my revenue, what's my expenses, all that. So I'm tracking both things there, which again, it just gives me more a clearer understanding of which way the business is tracking.
I'm going to put you on the spot. I didn't prep you for this, but I'm going to ask the question for all you guys here. I'm thinking for Herman and Josh, maybe the guys that have been around a little longer. But if I put myself in the shoes of some of these businesses that are maybe not as much water under the bridge, I might be sitting here today going, how do I do all that and run and keep an eye on my 4 crews out there or my 5 techs in the shop and go do the sale at the front desk or meet, like, how do you do all that? And the rest of it's like, where did you start? Other than the fact that you and I used to work way too many hours.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's not just a question for you, but I'm thinking, Herman, some of the advice for other guys you might have on your, how do you run all this and run your business and keep an eye, Josh, you're keeping an eye on all your crews. That's part of your role. And you got to have your eye on this and like what gives?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, sure. The biggest thing I would say is having a system and a process. So again, it's making a plan of how to track it and then just executing on that plan and making sure that the different people who are involved, like for instance, the lady in the office who's entering timesheets, for instance, that she's on board and understands what you're doing and why you're doing it and how what you want it to look like at the end. And I find even Herman mentioned before there too, like getting the foreman, these older foremen and whatever else to embrace doing these things. If you can help them understand the why of what you're trying to do, that's a huge piece. And it's interesting actually, the change that I've seen in people when they actually understand that piece and go, oh, I can buy into this and I can engage on that.
Well, they want to win too. If they know where the goalposts are. Yeah. The other thing it sounds to me like what it's doing is the structure actually creates some ease versus maybe in your earlier days, you're running ragged, doing all this stuff until you created the structure and had all the clarity and the why. That structure created ease for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still busy, etc. But
and it's been a process along the way, right? Like, I mean, the very first thing that I wanted to know was, how do I know if this job is being done in the amount of time that's allowed for it? How do I schedule work? If I'm doing unit pricing, but there's not a labor factor assigned to it, I have no idea how long it's supposed to take, right? So that's where it all started.
Yeah.
And then over the years, it became crucial to me to track the actual hours versus what I quoted for the hour. But then it became glaringly obvious looking at the profit and loss going, well, I'm 10% under hours, but I'm still not making profit. Something's wrong. Okay, now I need to figure out that piece, right? And that's where the budget piece comes, figuring out all those numbers and tying that to the labor budget.
How about for anyone else? Just comments on even what Jeff just said? Like, how does that resonate for you, Herman? You're nodding your head.
Yeah, I would say for us, we struggled with it for a long time because we often just did markups, like a markup on labor, markup on trades, markup on materials, and looked at the percentage of return on the bottom of a job and bid on it. And some years will go good, some years will not go good. Some months you think you're making good money, the next month you think you lost money. And once we started to focus in on our key metric as being hours, and then figured out, how many man hours is billable every year, and then divide that through on your overhead. How much dollars do you need per man hour that you're billing out to cover your overhead? Now we actually track our WIP by that same amount. We budget our revenue by that same amount. So we first figure out our hours, and that tells us how much revenue we're going to put through. We figure out how many hours we got in a year, and that tells us, in our profit. Then it tells us what our billable rate is. And so it was a complete reversal, but the work up front made it pretty obvious which jobs you need to bid on. And if you lost a job, you just walked away with a smile because you knew you didn't need that job. Because we've had jobs where that were totally labor based, and you make 40% return on it, and you think you're laughing all the way to the bank, and then you find out that isn't near enough. Or you have a job where you have sub trades involved, and you only make 12% on because it's all trades on it, and you're thinking, crap, I didn't make enough money. But then you actually look at how much money you made per man hour, and you're like, wow, if I did all those jobs at 12% and put through that kind of revenue, then it's good money, right? So it depends on your business and knowing your metrics. But once you figure that out, you sleep better at night for sure. That's what I heard Jeff say, and I agree.
Oh yeah.
Herman, one last thing for maybe you and Josh is, and what do you do? Jeff gave the example of 3 different options he did when the labor force goes awry, meaning you lose people, maybe they leave, maybe they're sick for long periods of time. What's your first go-to when you're measuring all that? What do you do?
So Josh can speak better to this, but we budget every month. So we have a budget for the year. Month by month, how many hours are going through every single month based on days and holidays and stat holidays and all that kind of stuff. And then Josh will actually do a forecast every month too. So we'll set up the forecast based on what employment we have. And then we make sure our HR team is totally aligned. So as we have a bit of turnover or someone gets sick, we're constantly recruiting and making sure that they meet the target too. Their goal is to keep the labor at the right height, at the right level, right? So,
yeah.
And what's crucial there too is making a realistic hours budget, right? But not being too conservative, not being too aggressive and eye in the sky, but just that happy medium.
Okay, yeah. Josh, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you a quick question. Like, we're around man hour as well, so we track it like it's going out of style, and we track all the factors that go into that. Days off. One of the biggest numbers for us is hours per day, right? So 7.9 hours is a big difference from 8.2, for example. Is there one? So I think, like, from our standpoint, it's important that we know the business, but the question is, how do you democratize your numbers to the point where your team knows it? So is there like one KPI that every member of your team knows, Jeff, that they live by, or is there how do you dumb that down for your team?
But that's right. I didn't hear the last part.
How do you dumb that down for the team to work in their world?
Right. Well, I mean, for them, it's the big piece for them was understanding the relationship between how many hours were quoted and how many hours it took, right? But the other big piece too is that so when you build your labor budget, how many hours a day is it based on? This is how many hours a day you need to work so that the company can meet the obligations and essentially pay your wage, right? And all the other commitments. Does that answer your question, or are you driving at something else, Josh?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious, like, what KPI you focused on. Like, so sounds like you're saying it's how many billable hours, say, per day.
Yeah, billable hours per day, but just making sure that we're always I always shot for 10% under. I always, you know, my goal is always any job, if it has 1,000 hours, I want to do it in 900. Because there's always that risk factor too, like I mentioned earlier in that world of contracting, where when I give a fixed price to a customer, now I assume the risk if something goes sideways. So I have to be compensated for that somehow, because Murphy does happen too.
And you built in that 10% when you built the price.
Always, yeah.
So just to recap, so the key performance indicator that you're telling a foreman is he has the hour, he's given, in this case, Josh, he's given how many hours he's supposed to do that task in and at times job in. I remember, Jeff, you break that down, right? So let the gravel base on this section here is you should have, 4 to 6 hours or whatever it is.
I would generally, and everyone will have a different opinion on this. I'm not a firm believer in sharing the exact numbers with the foreman, but I would give them rough goals. I would say, it's about a week's work to do this. It's about 2 weeks work to do this. And I found some people do really well with that, but I've also had other people who they become their own project manager, seeing how long everything took and am I meeting the hours instead of focusing what they need to focus on, which is doing great work as quickly as possible. Right.
Cool. Anybody else? I was thinking, you guys in the Hansma Automotive, I don't know how it's set up there, but I just love to hear, how does your model work there in the mechanic shop when maybe your shop rate is, let's say, I don't know, 150 an hour? How do you know how those numbers were created? Are you part of that? How does your team meet those hours when you got a tech on the floor doing an oil change or whatever it may be, wheel alignment? You guys want to share?
Yeah, well, it is something that we've started more recently tracking. The metrics that we have been sharing with everybody is, the efficiency. We do it by cost per build hour, and then we also hours per work order. So we're in an industry where we're trying to provide a service of reliability to the customer, providing their vehicle, giving them, I don't know how to say it. We were told that if we worked at 100%, we're not doing the customer service. If we had tunnel vision with our customers and we were doing a great job and it takes an hour and a half and we hit 100% efficiency and get that car out the door, we are not providing our customers with the service that they are expecting from us. They're expecting us to provide information on what their vehicle needs in the future, and we need to slow it down a little bit and show what their vehicle's going to need in the future. So we have this tricky situation where our goal is actually 80%. That's kind of what we were recommended by another financial kind of course that we were sitting in on. That gives you time that you're not billing out. I don't know. Yeah, and that creates more work in the future too, right?
Yeah.
But then the key is making sure that 20% that you're not billing is built into the charge rate on those 80% hours, right?
Yeah. So we went through that whole, my wife does the books, and we basically in the last few months took the entire year's expenses, everything from paying benefits to your employees to what you give to charity. Like, what does it cost to turn the key in the morning in the door, and how much money do you need to, bill out and make as revenue before you make $1 of profit to cover all your costs, and that's how we kind of come up on pricing and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yep, very good.
Way to go, guys. Thanks for that. Thanks again for being here. Gilbert, any questions? Alka, Brandon, Dave, Mark, any questions as we close out?
No questions here yet.
Okay, thanks, Gilbert. Or maybe just anybody have what's something that resonated for you today that you thought that was helpful or that made me think about something? Just love to wrap up with a couple closing comments. How about for you, Luke? You knew I was going to do that, eh, bud?
Yeah. No, appreciate it. I'm on this train right now. So it's really prevalent in what my business is going through. I think we actually do a decent job of tracking per job, but I'm just worried that the way I track per job has nothing to do with the actual bottom line and the actual numbers. So that's why I'm working through with Matt. And yeah, it's been really helpful. So thanks.
Cool. Anybody else a take home from today, Dan or Mark?
I just say that for me, KPIs are very essential part of my business. Maybe I'm like you, Jeff, where I need to know what my bottom line is per month. So I track it like nobody's business. So I got a budget. I have my actuals versus my budget, and I keep on track. And I also do one step further where I do a business plan that's kind of more like my ideas, so that if I'm off track, at least I know where I could focus my energy on and build the business. So yeah, definitely been doing that for 5 years now and constantly improving. It's I must say it's always been a work in progress for me. Where a lot of my P&L sheets, I start to add in other costs that I kind of allocate with the cost of goods. So for example, what I mean by that is I started doing because it's a cost of finance for my side of the business. I'm in chemical distribution, so I have a cost with financing. I put that part of the cost of goods now. I used to have that separated, and then finding that my gross margin is much more beefier than than my net profit. So when I did that, it actually gave me a healthier sense of what I'm actually doing and how much I'm actually making when I quote customers and get out my product out the door. So I know that it's not inflated. It's actually the reverse of that. So I always like to see an extra 2% rather than seeing less than 2%.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Mark.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Otherwise, we're gonna close out. And before we do, I just got a couple short little announcements. But anybody else? Question, comment, key take home today? I'm okay with silence. It's all good. Cool. Well, a couple things. If anybody, you can send me a direct note or put it in the chat. But if anybody would like to see a further piece just on now, how do I communicate and, for lack of a better word, sell a higher price point? For most of you, you might be in a business where your price is higher than the competitor and you need help with that. Let us know. We can do a piece on that. And then a summarizing piece, just Jeff, one thing I just love what you shared today is the piece for you, how you're built in your God design, just wanting to do your job with excellence and with stewardship. It's not, I know in the past we've had discussion of even staff sometimes thinking of this whole topic of pricing and profit as, well, you're just only interested in a month, right? Versus no, actually, and your role, or if I'm a GM or if I'm an owner of this, that's actually part of my God design. That's my role in this business, and doing that from a point of stewardship so that I can actually do something with this business, meaning serve people with it, invest in people, equipment. There's a future here. I just love to leave today on that note is that's called kingdom advancement and doing good for others. And it doesn't have to be self-serving, right? So I just wanted to remind us of that outlook from a Christian perspective as we see profit as a beautiful thing to serve others with. Hey, Mark, would you like to just close out in prayer along those lines, just blessing these guys on their way?
Sure, absolutely. As long as my audio is still good.
No, it's really good.
Is it? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Dear gracious Lord, we come to you now. We want to thank you for this time that we get to spend all together, and God, and just that we can learn from each other and grow our businesses. God, in your design and in your grace as well, remembering your Son paid the ultimate price for our sins, that we could be here and enjoy each other's company. God, I just ask a special blessing on Darren and running today's message, and God, just ask that you watch over every one of us and allow us to continue to be a light in our, not only in our work world, but also at home and in our families, as well as our friends. God, we pray for these things in your name, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, Mark. Jeff, thank you so much for all your time put into this, coming here today, for being a guest for these guys.
My pleasure.
Yeah, awesome.
Nice to talk with you guys.
See you, folks.
Everybody, guys.
See ya.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.